there. Let's see, I can see Barbara and Dennis. Is there anybody else on yet?
Hi.
Hey, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Let's see, one person wanted to join who registered, so I'm just going to send her the link.
For you, Sarah.
Hello.
Whoa.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Barbara.
Hi. It's good to see you.
Likewise, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I'm getting organized here with our 2 yabs. We're on retreat this week.
Sure.
Okay. Start the recording. Okay, so we're recording, and with no further ado, I'll just turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Emily. It's good to see and or hear you all this evening. I as well know most of you in some capacity, whether or not we've met in person, but I certainly know all of your names. I am the coordinator at this point of the Columbia Accompaniment program. So tonight what we're going to do is a few things. I have a greeting from our friend Diego Higuita with the Presbyterian Church of Columbia. He wasn't able to join us, but I had him write us a note, which I've translated. I have some updates on what's going on in Colombia. And then I ultimately wanted to get to some participation by the end, and we're going to frame the rest of our conversation with Tom Driver's sermon on accompaniment. We also have with us Sarah Henkin, PCUSA mission coworker and YAV coordinator in Colombia, and 2 YAVs. So I'm going to invite them to speak for a little bit, just very casually, on what they observe going on right now with the peace process unfolding, and just anything else that stands out to them, as well as how they might envision people in the U.S. continuing to be supportive and in solidarity with the IPC and the peace process. And then after that, I hope we can have some conversation as much as technology allows between all of us, because I do really hope this is a shared partnership, a shared collaboration. So before we jump in, I just am going to read a prayer that Tom included in his sermon from the Reverend Milton Mejia, who many of us know. Let us pray. God of hope, who accompanies us, sustains us, and encourages us, see our sadness, look at our anguish, be moved by our tears. God, hear the cry of those who have been killed, liberate the righteous, give us security to our land. O Jesus, help us to work together for the good news of peace, that as your churches we might accompany and give protection to those who suffer. We want to be a sign of solidarity and celebrate together the hope of your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So I, in this role, text and talk a lot with Diego, and I just wanted to include his words in our time together, and hopefully down the road, as these webinars continue, we'll find a way to keep including him and other voices, other partners from the IPC as well. perhaps in more kind of live version forms, not just in a written and read greeting. But I'll just go ahead and read this. So imagine our friend Diego saying this to us all. Good evening, friends. Of course, we would like to send a very big greeting to all the people involved in PPF and specifically in relationship with Columbia and the IPC. The Presbyterian Church of Columbia is currently focused on the event of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, in the strengthening of our Reformed heritage in the ecclesial communities and in educational processes. On the other hand, the focus of much conversation in Columbia continues to be peace. The FARC dialogues at this point are continuing with the process of disarmament. Some interior scandals involving the repatriation camps and zones, and some breach of the accords on the part of the government. The scandals include the rape of minors in the demobilization zones. At the end of the day, there are many setbacks, but peace is slowly advancing. Also, the dialogues with the ELN keep pushing forward in Quito, Ecuador. The IPC is accompanying political prisoners of this group with pastoral support. There have been national strikes by various groups recently in Colombia, including in El Chocó on the Pacific side. They are asking for a consistent state presence and response in regards to supplying basic needs. There continues a territorial dispute in the geographic area of Belén de Bajira, which is disputed between Antioquia and Chocó, which has been going on for over 20 years and has left dozens of people dead. This region has kind of a national and international interest on it because of the rich mineral resources in the land there. And there's also a national teachers strike that has been going on for a month now and reflects the crisis currently happening in the Colombian educational sector. And as the IPC, we are involved in the reconstruction of a new ecumenical space that would involve the whole of Latin America, given a crisis happening in CLAI, the Latin American Council of Churches. There may be some reform happening or the formation of a new organization that kind of returns the focus to addressing the most central and structural problems in Latin America. And he concludes, so there are lots of things happening now in Colombia. We ask your continued prayers for us, and ours will continue to be with you all. And he sends us his hugs. So just a current kind of update on what I can find happening in Colombia, and certainly I will invite our colleagues in Colombia. If you have any amendments to this, certainly feel free to correct me. But the final rounds of the FARC demobilization are happening, but there's been a postponement. There's a bit of a delay, which President Santos announced over the weekend. This means potentially that things could be fully disarmed by next Monday. But again, there have been delays in the process already, mostly logistics. But the UN does kind of account for 60% of weapons at this point. And so the last step is the last 40% to be kind of handed over. And they expect kind of a ceremonial acknowledgement of this kind of setting down of arms and the ending of half a century of conflict next week, which feels pretty big, at least from my reading and understanding. And I unfortunately was also reading of some violence happening in Bogota over the weekend. I don't know if this is something you all saw, but both a bomb attack in a Bogota shopping mall, which killed 3 and injured 9. And then today I read of a hand grenade also being detonated in a different area. As far as I'm reading analysis, it seems the motive likely behind both is destabilizing the peace process. Certainly, the country is very, very much still divided over kind of how this peace process is happening. There's a lot of speculation on who are behind these, especially the mall one, but guesses include, dissident military, the Gaitanese self-defense, even dissident FARC members, perhaps, ELN, or even others. Santos held a press conference later that day from the mall, trying to kind of calm fears, encourage unity, and promising justice. I thought it was noteworthy that is really trying to happen, ending this demobilization process, then all of a sudden these kind of high impact attacks in Bogota. And certainly our thoughts and prayers are especially with kind of victims and their families. Reports of kind of not full transparency, allowing journalists and documentation of the demobilization. From military, like taking pictures of journalists, asking for credentials, up to detaining them for periods of hours. Also discrimination of local media versus international media. But this doesn't seem to lend kind of faith or encourage kind of an understanding of transparency in the demobilization process if people can't kind of access and have an account of what's happening in these zones. Let's see what else. Many of you may have seen, and I know a lot of us were posting about Santos's visit up to our capital, Washington, D.C., and his press conference, May 20th, which is now about a month ago, but there's still kind of a lot of strong, appropriately strong, so many of us would think, reaction to that incident. One online editorial went as far as to name it hilarious, deeply offensive, and a self-destructive event on the part of our U.S. administration. So there's much, certainly a long history between our government and the Colombia government and our own government's kind of long and deep involvement. But there's a lot of concern, and it did bring up a lot of questions about how our government, our administration will continue or not to back peace. The WOLA organization, Washington Office on Latin America, has done a lot of detailed work. They have some good documents out on what would set up Colombia for peace to most likely succeed and be sustainable. And they have some pretty kind of detailed research because the reality is, while we've put so many billions into kind of security and military support, if all of that was stopped at this point, they really do need our support, but they need our support in the right places. So kind of the things they've outlined are, Obama, before he left, promised $450 million, I believe is the number, to go towards kind of implementing the peace accords, building up infrastructure that's needed to make peace successful. And they say that, Colombia really does need at least that much. And so far, Peace Colombia is part of what was approved in the budget in May of this year. But the big concern at this point is that 2018, the foreign aid budget could remove, all of that. And so certainly just 1 year of aid is not going to make a sustainable situation. There's concern kind of for the increased coca cultivation that's being seen, which it's kind of a multifactorial situation that's kind of feeding that situation. But WOLA really wants to see the U.S. Government and administration allow Colombia kind of to implement the plan that's in the accords for cultivating that, rather than kind of leaning back on policies that never worked and really fed the conflict and made for a bad situation for anyone in those geographic regions. They really want the U.S. government to kind of push hard and call for accountability in the recent spike of targeted violence, towards social leaders, human rights defenders, and minority communities. And WOLA says, the peace accords have these commitments in them. It's written in there, but the U.S. really needs to hold the Santos and the government and ask them to prioritize those efforts. And there's still much concern for Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities that were hardest hit by this conflict. And these communities were included kind of in the dialogue, which is kind of resulting in what people refer to as the ethnic chapter of the Accords. But again, it's essential that, we see these chapters enforced and implemented so those communities are safe. And as the FARC has demobilized, as you perhaps read about, the ELN and other paramilitary groups, kind of continue to perpetrate violence in those areas, kind of a vacuum of power happening. So again, WOLA really wants to see the U.S. government and administration support the peace process, to see that through as well, but also to see efforts to dismantle these paramilitaries that continue to cause a lot of problems, a lot of violence, and continue the conflict in reality. I think that this is a good time, Sarah, and Yavs, I'm sorry I don't know your names. I ran out of time to look them up, so I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself, if that's okay. But I wonder what your all's thoughts are and observations on how kind of peace continues to unfold, what's happening on the ground these days. Join us in the conversation.
Thanks, Laura. I'll let the Yavs introduce themselves and share the thoughts that they might have, and see if there's anything I'd like to add to that.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Brittany Beasley, and I am a Yaf in Colombia. I work in Barranquilla for the Presbytery of the Coast of the IPC. And something that I've noticed as far as people's general attitude towards the peace accords and moving towards peace is that I see a lot of enthusiasm in young people. Like a lot of, pretty much all the young people, I can count on one hand the number of youth or young people that I've met and talked to about how they feel about the accords that are not excited about it, or not enthusiastic, or not in favor of it, or like, no, I definitely don't want like this to happen because of X, Y, Z. So that's been really interesting. And I also remember that there were lots of students gathering to like march after the accords were voted no, way back in October. The first thing I remember noticing is that students were the ones who got out. Not the only ones, but I remember there were a lot of students that were contributing to the conversation. Like young people here talking about it. And that's something that I find really interesting. Something I know. Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Ainsley. So I started out my YAV year in Pital de Megua, which is a little town outside of Barranquilla. And now I'm working in Barranquilla with one of the Presbyterian churches. So one of the things that I've noticed, especially lately, now that they're starting to disarm the FARC and everything, and really starting to get into the work of the peace accords, is there's some people who are they don't have a lot of faith in the government, especially now with the protests that are happening and the response. Like there was one protest, where was it? There was a protest where the government responded very violently. Yes, Buenaventura. And so that was, there was a lot of conversation, like, is this a sign that we can't really trust the peace accords? There's a lot of people wondering, like, is the government really going to come through on these promises that they're making? Like, people are like, yeah, these are good promises, but like, is it really going to happen?
Sure.
And there's a lot of historical precedent to lead people to wonder about that, because as many of us know, Colombia has, in the past 25, 30 years at least, had a good track record of creating legal frameworks and policy that sounds wonderful, but actually seeing it come to fruition and be implemented and understood. You get your yeah, so that's been a consistent challenge here, is seeing the rubber meet the road, seeing what living into good legislation, good public policy, good constitutional rights actually looks like for the people who need to be benefited by those policies. So those are valid questions, and certainly through the work of the Presbyterian Church, we are walking alongside folks who are trying very hard to lean on the hopeful, optimistic, seeing things set in motion that will be good for common Colombians, and especially for those who've been victims of this conflict, and trying to be a force for the common good in that way. I think this is also a really key time for those of us who are U.S. citizens, as Laura was mentioning, talking about public pressure in the U.S. Congress, State Department, with the presidential administration, trying to push for strong support for the peace process, not going back to old drug policy that doesn't work, but continuing to stay engaged with Colombia, not to pull out, but especially not to give up on some of the promising new initiatives, to stay present in that international policy sphere. So staying actively engaged with the advocacy alerts that are coming out through WOLA and LOG, Latin American Working Group, also has continues to be connected on these issues. And I'm sure PPF will continue to circulate some of those as their most key. But also at this point, I would say, in addition to all of our prayers for the peace process, educating also in our churches and in our communities about what's happening in Colombia, helping people understand this complicated reality. I know so many of you are accompaniers and folks who have been involved in the Mission Network who've been to Colombia, and you understand some of the very complicated picture that it is. So prayer support is really vital, but also those of you who are accompaniers or who would like to be part of the accompaniment program, continuing to have people come down and be present. This is a time when the threats do not diminish, the problems do not diminish just because the peace accords are signed. So trying to increase our presence, whether it's being able to have accompaniers here, or also if you have a group of folks from your local church or someone who'd like to bring a delegation, you come down trying to work on those opportunities to keep an active and visible presence from the church, sign of international solidarity and support within the Presbyterian family, within our Christian family, that this is something that we're trying to support, even though it does face all of these challenges that we've been hearing about here on this call and reading about and seeing in the news.
Nice to internet meet you. Before I am going to invite as many people are willing to kind of introduce yourself, and we're going to kind of encourage some more participation. But I wanted to use Reverend Tom Driver, who's got a long history with PPF and the accompaniment program. He wrote this sermon called Accompaniment, a great theme of the Bible, the great theme of the Bible, excuse me, in Holy Week 2010 for a joint reflection and evaluation that happened with the North Coast Presbytery in Columbia, which was the 5th anniversary of the Columbia Accompaniment Program. And that was, goodness, 7 years ago. But Shannon, Vance Ocampo, and myself and some others who were at the Activist Council meeting in April were thinking that we might like to revisit this document. And it still speaks so much to me. I hope some of you read it, but in case you didn't, I am going to read just a couple quick excerpts to kind of frame our conversation and maybe get some thoughts going. So just listen to his wisdom here for a minute or so. I'm just going to kind of jump around from the beginning to the end. He says to us, accompaniment is the great theme of the Bible. It is the window through which we should see the whole of the gospel and the entire meaning of our faith. Accompaniment is what it is all about. It starts on the first page of the Bible. The dazzling insight of the Bible's creation story is the togetherness of things. We can express the biblical idea of creation this way. Where there is one, there shall be two. And where there are two or more, they shall be together. I'm jumping a few pages if you happen to be following along. My apologies. Here we go. Yeah, much further down, probably 2/3 the way in at least. So he's talking now about Jesus and how Jesus is showing and modeling for us accompaniment, and in fact embodying accompaniment. So he says, he, meaning Jesus, calls it a new command. But of course it was not brand new. It was already there in the second of the 10 commandments, that we should love our neighbors as ourselves. But here, Jesus stresses the mutuality of the accompanying kind of love. To be with people as Jesus is with us, we need to do loving things for them. And now it kind of reading his final conclusion. And that as I was reading this the other day, I thought, oh wow, this was certainly true in 2010, and if not even more so in 2017, it feels like. In the United States, there is great wealth, but there is also more and more poverty. The economy teeters on the edge of disaster, and our constitutional democracy is under siege. We have too many people who are sick without doctors, and too many trying to survive without jobs. We have too many people locked up in prisons. Our military is too big. The United States is becoming addicted to war. This causes physical death in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as Colombia. It leads to spiritual death at home. The people of Colombia and the United States are on the same boat together, and it is leaking. We must work together if we are ever going to fix the boat. We must start right here in this room and at this table. So I will invite some kind of reactions when you introduce yourself, but the themes that I was kind of pulling out that I hope we continue to discern, as an activist council, as people who have been to Colombia, might go to Colombia, are in Colombia, kind of on all of the ends of this Peace USA, IPC, PPF partnership are kind of, what does it mean to be engaged in a mutual love, based on, loving your neighbor, and the give and take, the two-way, he calls it the two-way streetness of that love that Jesus is teaching us. And I also appreciated that he does certainly highlight that Jesus engages in speaking truth to power. We certainly do that in PPF and all the times that we engage in advocacy. But I also liked how he highlighted they also just stuck together. They were really committed to loving your neighbor and being neighbor and doing things together, eating and going out and staying in and going to temple and going to political actions. And so sometimes I wonder, if we also need to revisit what it just means to be doing this thing together. How are we together? And I just really love that he says, just flat out, accompaniment is what we're about as Christians. I fully agree with him. I love it. So I really would love to invite some participation. So what I'm gonna ask is, if you're willing, I'm certainly not keeping tabs on who's on here. I'm not gonna check names, who talked, who didn't. But name, where you're calling in from. If you do have a 1 or 2 sentence reflection on Tom's sermon, if you happen to read it or what I just read to you, you're welcome to say that. But I also am curious to hear ideas. So, the accompaniment program is, we've been doing this for at least 12 years now, and it continues to flex and amend. I got some feedback from someone. Sorry, hopefully it wasn't me. So one of one of the things we've recently been thinking about is what does it mean to do accompaniment? Now that peace accords have been signed, but it is still very much needed. Are we accompanying in the right places, or are there places that maybe need us more, or what does that even mean? So I spent some significant time thinking about how we accompany, and certainly it means sending people to do accompaniment, but are there other ways that we can engage in accompaniment?
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Doing okay.
Yes.
With lots of.
Sorry, where was I? So, for example, I'm welcoming all kinds of ideas. I'm not sure the other day, but for some reason I was remembering how in elementary school we had pen pals. And I remember one kind of a longer term pen pal scenario they had us in for some reason, but getting to know the person, that I didn't meet and wasn't physically in my space, but we kind of built this relationship and we learned about each other and we learned from each other's experiences. So I thought, what would it be like? Would there be a way we could accompany each other? Certainly it wouldn't have to be paper and pen. We have so much more technology these days. Obviously we're here on this webinar, but could we do some sort of accompaniment of each other? I don't know, pen pal accompaniment. I welcome all ideas. Kind of thinking on these larger themes that Tom has challenged us with, your own experiences, how can we continue to learn from each other and engage in this kind of mutual love and relationship? So I invite you all to let us know who you are and where you are, and share some thoughts if you're willing.
So Laura, just so everybody knows, since we were getting some feedback, I did go ahead and mute everyone, but you have the power to unmute yourself. So just roll over the screen, and on the bottom left, you can unmute yourself, except for the folks on the phone. So I wonder if I'll just, it looks like we have one person who's calling in by phone, so I'll go ahead and unmute you. It looks like it's a 281 number. So you're unmuted, and if you want to introduce yourself, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. This is Bob Ross. I'm calling from Durham, North Carolina. I'm with Elizabeth Michael here as well. And we're just listening. We really appreciate everything that we're learning tonight. So thanks very much. I don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. I'll mute you. If you want me to unmute you, just text me.
Okay.
So anybody else should be able to unmute yourself. And as you're thinking about your response, just know also that on that same screen, when you roll over, there's a little chat button at the bottom. And we chatted the links to some of these resources that Laura was mentioning. So those are available. And now whoever wants to introduce themselves and reflect a little bit about the theme of accompaniment, you're welcome to.
I'll help you out, Laura.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Sure. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Sarah.
Good to
Hi,
see
Drake.
you.
I'm Jeff Todd. I'm in Wausau, Wisconsin. Accompaniment, I think, really is very important. And one of the ways that I found to be able to do accompaniment almost daily. By the way, I trained with Laura and Emily and others, Linda, in the accompaniment program at Stony Point, and I went to Urubá. Spent most of my time in Apartado last August. I've also been to Colombia one other time in 2010 when we met with all three of the presbyteries in the IPC over a 8-day period. We did some reform training jointly with each other and learn from each other. But anyway, getting to the question that Laura, you raised about accompaniment, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not talking with folks directly through either WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever. Many of the friends that I met, we have almost daily contact now through social media and other forms of media, and I think it really works very well. Our presbytery also is one of about 7 in the country that has a special relationship with one of the presbyteries in Urubá, Winnebago Presbytery. I am honored to currently serve as the moderator of Winnebago Presbytery, and we're now in the 3rd 5-year covenantal relationship with Urubá, and we have about every other year in exchange. Either our friends come to Winnebago, or we send a delegation to Colombia to spend time and accompany and worship and do fellowship with our colleagues and brothers and sisters down there. So that's a great way of doing it. We are talking with Diego and Sarah right now about trying to pull together a trip in October, which I hopefully will be a part of, and perhaps even involving, if we can pull this off, the entire Colombia network and the other presbyteries. So that's certainly a great way of getting involved. When we get to a chance, though, Laura, I really would like to talk a little bit about, when we get to the question and answers, about some of the really concerning things that I'm reading from WOLA and from Latin America Working Group about the increasing violence with the paramilitary groups, filling the void that's been left by the FARC and others, and what that bodes for our peacemaking efforts. And then I was really curious on how the peacemaking efforts that were discussed very seriously last summer with our Mennonite colleagues, if that's taken off and gone anywhere in the presbyteries. But anyway, there you go. Helped you out, Laura.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, I'll write those down and we can come back to those.
Hi, this is Ruth, and see. And meet the Yavs who are currently down in Columbia. The information.
I'm struggling to hear you, Ruth. I'm not sure if the
About the violence that is occurring and how an unstable connection. So that might be, is this better?
Yes, I think that's
Okay.
better.
Okay. So I was saying that I'm in the Silver Spring, Maryland area and have been down twice as an accompanier. It's good to see Sarah and to meet the current Yavs who are down there. I actually talked to Sophia, who had another webinar tonight and could not join us, who was the Yav who was there when I was down there. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the whole violence that is happening in Colombia now and the delay in handing over weapons and how that will affect the peace process.
So this is Tricia calling from Louisville, Kentucky. And I was on the phone for the first part of the time, but really fun to see everyone's faces. I was an accompanier in November. So I was also in the training with Emily and Jeff and some others. Well, Emily wasn't exactly being trained. She was just there making sure that Laura and Linda and others were doing a good job. I think my question would be about a little other piece of the accompaniment, but just seeing the faces over here with Sarah of the Yavs, who I check in with on Facebook every once in a while. Just I know their time's coming to an end and would love to hear a little bit more reflection from the two of you about how your presence as Yavs and how the Yav program fits in with the whole accompaniment. It's not part of the accompaniment program per se, but it's a very real part of the bigger picture. So I hope we might have a time to hear from you all a little bit more about that.
I think I will invite Sarah and the Yavs again to speak a little more, but I don't want to cut off anyone else who was willing to jump in and offer just who they are and if they have any other thoughts. I don't want the introductions to get lost in this process.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm Meredith and I'm calling from Chicago. I'm a current Yav here. I don't really have much to add. I got kind of bit by the bug at the Activist Council, and I wanted to stay in the loop. So
Yay.
it's kind of why I'm here.
And that is a great reason to be here.
And Laura, folks might also, if they're hesitant to speak, you can also use the chat box to just tell us where you are and where you're calling from if that feels more comfortable.
Yeah, that would work too.
Let me. Hello?
Hello?
Can I jump in briefly?
Yes, please jump in.
Hey, this is Dennis Smith. I'm Peace USA Regional Liaison for South America, and I'm calling in from Lima, Peru, where I'm here in some meetings this week. And just want to give a shout out to all of you who are working on this particular program and accompaniment. It is important not only because of the ways that your lives have been transformed by these ongoing processes of being in a deep relationship with people who are often pretty different from and come from a different living situation than yours, but also because of how it builds and strengthens the relationships between our churches. And I guess one of the things as I travel throughout South America that I'm noticing more and more, how deeply polarized our political and economic and cultural situation is throughout the region. Whether or not it's where I live in Argentina, or in Brazil, or in Colombia, or next door in Venezuela, or here in Peru. Just like in the United States, we are living in a time when our daily lives are increasingly caught up in a sense of deep frustration and a sense of powerlessness and a sense of deep division within our communities. And that is something that we are modeling how to address through programs like accompaniment, because we are demonstrating that when push comes to shove, we need to be able to live out our faith by standing with one another. So just a shout out to y'all, and I get to Colombia a couple of times a year, and I'm very thankful for Sarah and the Yavs, and for Cesar Carawachin, and for all of you who have been part of that witness there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm glad you could join us.
This is Kathy Surgenor, and I was an accompanier back in 2008. I've been to Colombia 3 times, and looking forward to going again early next year as an accompanier with my husband Peter, who's also with us. You can wave, Peter. Thanks. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the accompaniment idea that Tom raised in his sermon. A couple of you know I've been working on a little blog piece about why I want to go back to Colombia, and the thing that finally came through for me as the more I thought about it was that there is a cheerfulness and encouragement that the members of the IPC give to each other and to the people in the communities that they're working with. There's a sense of joy and of enjoying music and jokes and just being together and eating together and dancing together, that I think gives them strength and gives them the ability to carry on in spite of all the things that they are struggling with, and that gave me strength and courage in situations where I might be a little uncomfortable, their ability to focus on whatever was going on at hand and to do it with such enthusiasm. I think the word encouragement, although it's not in the dictionary, I think it means to give courage to one another. And so I think accompaniment has been a really powerful way to keep doing the work decade after decade after decade. So.
This is Bill and Liz Branch in Little Rock.
Hey, Branches.
Hi there.
Mm-hmm.
We were accompaniers in 10 and then again in
13.
13, okay. I knew it was 12 or 13. When you're having fun, you kind of lose track of things. But one of the things that we thought about as we were seeing Sarah and the Yavs, Liz and I do a sort of an editing of the reports that come in from the accompaniers. We look them over and in some cases say great and pass them on. Occasionally we'll make some changes along the way. But how would it be, and you Yavs may want to holler back on this one, but it seems like 3 or 4 times a year it would be awfully good to get about a 1-page report from the Yavs so that it can be published and it can tell folks about the YAV program and particularly about what's happening in Columbia.
Sounds great to me. We can talk about how to make that happen in the best way, whether that's cross-posting blog posts that the Yavs do for their own blogs or writing special pieces at certain times. Yeah, definitely. Let's do it.
I would think that whatever they are doing normally could be just sent and we could send it out. If they're blogging, go for it. Blog away.
We recruit you, yeah. Surprise.
And I was going to mention, sorry, just I think everyone knows, but Yavs are young adult volunteers. I don't remember who actually said that. Deciphered the alphabet too, just in case.
Liz and I work with the Yavs who are stationed here in Little Rock. So we keep up with Yavs all the time.
And love the relationship.
It's great.
I think most people have introduced themselves that maybe want to. Am I cutting anyone off? I don't want to, but I want to be mindful of time as well.
This is Ben. I am in Chicago now, pastor at Morgan Park Presbyterian Church, and was an accompanier with Laura several years ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
4 years.
And I'm also part of the alumni association that's been created over the last year for the Columbia Accompaniment Program. And we've been organizing to try to share with each other about our experiences and promote the program and try to have some more space for connection and raise some money too. So let me know if you're interested in getting involved in that if you're not already, like many of you on the call. And I really am interested in the idea of doing a delegation, like you mentioned, Sarah. I don't know exactly who to invite, but I think that's something that I have people that might have, there are people I would like to invite who might be able to do that easier than being an accompanier. And it would provide more exposure to what's going on in Colombia and with the IPC.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. So in noticing that we've already been having a great, I think, rich conversation for an hour, I think I'll go ahead and invite Sarah and Brittany and Ainsley. If you all have any more thoughts, or Sarah, if you could give kind of just like a super brief kind of take on violence that's been happening. I didn't warn you that I might ask you about kind of current headlines, so I'm just taking a chance. But yeah, maybe some final thoughts from our friends in Colombia.
Well, let me go ahead and jump in on that, since that's maybe the less positive note to end on.
Sure, fair.
It's hard to know, and I think the highlights that you shared with us help illustrate both the lack of certainty and the lack of cohesion behind the peace process and this way of doing a peace process here in Colombia. Well, I think pretty much all Colombians would say they want peace. What does peace mean? What does peace look like? Those are less clear and less unified answers. And I personally think a key part of it is, what does reconciliation require? And is there a will for true reconciliation? And there certainly is a significant segment of society and of the church that is saying yes and is trying to move forward in that. But I think there's a lot of discord and discontent about the process, about and what we're seeing is the pushback against that, the skepticism about the UN process of receiving the weapons from the FARC, the transitional zones, and yeah, there's just a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism, a lot of people not necessarily wanting reconciliation, but wanting retribution.
Sure.
So yeah, it's complicated, but here we are, and
right.
God is. So we're doing at least this bit of being here and being present in the midst of it. So Brittany and Ainsley, I think, both have something they'd like to try and share with y'all here as we conclude.
Yeah, I wanted to address something. I think this was a question from Trisha about how, as Yavs, how we relate our work here to accompaniment. And I think the core of what I do here and what I've done here during my Yav year is accompaniment, right? So like, I work in the Presbytery office for the North Coast Presbytery, and the activities that I'm involved in are all related to church. So I also do some educational activities and stuff and community activities, but everything is related to the IPC somehow. So I do a lot of accompanying, and then the IPC itself also accompanies lots of communities. Communities that are sort of on the margins of Colombian society. Like, for example, there are multiple groups of displaced persons that the church is accompanying. And I, in my work as a Yav, have had the opportunity over the course of my year multiple times to go and visit these communities. I wanted to share a conversation that I had with a coworker last week. And we were talking about my work here, and something he mentioned was this idea that North Americans are better than everyone else, and that a lot of people buy into that idea. And then he said, and specifically in Colombia, a lot of people believe that North Americans are better. So what are you doing in your year to actively combat this idea that you're better than me as a Colombian, right? Because how do you work together with me, and how do you show that you're not, right? How are you fighting this? And it was really, really thought-provoking. It's something I've been considering a lot, and I'm still pondering, but I think it's so important to think about that in the context of talking about accompaniment. And it's also something that I've seen reflected like in the IPC. Like we all carry different layers of privilege. And I've also seen when we're visiting, for example, communities on the margins that the IPC accompanies, I've seen that in action about like how members of the IPC that are doing these visits and doing this accompanying regularly are thinking like, how do I show these people that I'm not better than them, right? How do I work with them instead of helping them, right? Or like this kind of power imbalance. So that's something interesting that I've really been thinking about a lot during the course of my year. And it was just on my heart. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think another big part of our job also is building connections between here and the US with our churches there, and showing people back home that Colombia isn't just drugs and violence. Colombia is an incredible place with great diversity and a wonderful culture, and just helping people to see Colombia for what it is, so that they can be part of this process too, and not just be thinking about it the way that most Americans do, that this is where our drugs come from, this is just a place that we don't really consider, and helping to start those conversations with people back home. I think that's a really important part of what YAVs do, and also what accompaniers do. I feel like we're kind of an extension of the accompaniment program unofficially.
Sure. A great extension, I might add. I realized that we're gonna leave a couple kind of questions unanswered. I think it's time to wrap up. But I will email you if you've asked me that particular question, or if you've asked me a similar version of that question. Just I don't want to ignore them, but I want to kind of honor all of our times. Yeah, so I'm very grateful for this conversation from many states, multiple countries, 2 continents, and may this not be the end of this conversation. You all, I hope, have my contact information. If not, Laura, L-O-R-A, at PresbyPeaceFellowship.org if you have any kind of burning concerns, or you can find me on Facebook, give me a call. Yeah, let's keep this conversation going, in person, over internet, media, whatever it takes. And so to close, I asked Ben to say a prayer for us, if he's still there.
Sure, thank you, Laura. Holy God, we thank you for this special time where we find new bonds, new ways to connect, new ways to share your peace in this world. God, we grieve the violence that we have learned about. We grieve the brokenness that continues to inspire new forms of pain and suffering that we see happening to our family, our loved ones, our neighbors in Colombia. We cry out to you in our grief, and we ask that you would allow your bountiful blessings to flow in this time of peace, this time of seeking peace, that you would empower us and call us in, allow us to hear your call towards your message of peace, and empower our relationships to go stronger and our lives to be touched in new ways as we seek a future together. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. And this may take a few days, but this was indeed recorded, and you can feel free to share it with anyone else who may have missed it, or if you have a use for it in some situation, that's what it's here for. So thank you all very much. Have a good evening wherever you are.
Igualmente.
Thank you.
Bye.